Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. David Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new teen therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. David is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, David. How many different ways can you say hello, Rhonda? Probably 100. Well, everybody, welcome to episode 162. We have a wonderful guest here with us today. She's a member of our Tuesday group and that David teaches at Stanford. And there was recently a podcast, an Ask David podcast, where someone asked us to talk about the issue of OCD. And I think we're going to illustrate the treatment of OCD in our discussion today with Sara. David, anything you want to add? We want to add that we have... I'm sorry. I'm going to read a couple of endorsements that we got. One is from Turkey. It's so cool. He writes, "Thank you. The world needs a lot of people like you. Maybe in my life I will never see you because I live in Turkey. But thanks to your books, my life changed. I feel so much more brave, happy, and good. I hope you can reach out to more people and touch your life within them. If there's anything I can do for you, I would love to help. Best wishes, Burkay."
Oh, thank you for that, Burkay. It's just heartwarming when I get these notes almost daily from people around the world who have listened to the podcast and praising Rhonda or saying something we talked about was life-changing for them, or they read one of the books and found it life-changing. And it means so much to me. And we've been kind of ignoring these emails. We thought we'll try to read one or two short ones at the start of each podcast.
Yeah, they're really fun. Here's one from someone named Jackie, who writes, "Just started reading your book. I heard about it when I made the decision to start looking for techniques and tools to help my depression. I feel blessed and encouraged to have found your book. I started reading the pages and became glued to the book. I couldn't put it down. It's funny because an hour later I was washing the dishes and a distorted thought pattern started again. I was so excited because I could identify it right away and quickly stop going down that rabbit hole again. This is life-changing, truly. Thank you for your work. It's invaluable and life-saving." Jackie.
Well, thank you. That's just so cool. I'm so grateful that you took the time to write and share those thoughts. It's just like magic, really. And
it is.
Appreciate it. And you're like magic, Sara. And tell us who you are and what you do, and then we'll talk about what is OCD, and I want to hear just a little about your background too. When you were a little girl, I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, it's an awe-inspiring story. So.
And then we can talk about our fast cure for OCD.
Well, hello, I am Sara, and I am a licensed marriage, family, and therapist in Stockton, California, in the San Joaquin County or Valley. And I'm just very happy to be here this afternoon, just to share my life-changing story, thanks to Dr. Burns and the Tuesday group, with my OCD and how it's transformed my life. That treatment or intervention, what should we call it? Team intervention took place in January, and here 9 months later, I'm just a different person and so much more calm and less wasting time on the sink, as you'll know, well, as you'll hear about it.
We'll go into that, and we could probably even post that little video, because we have a brief video from the actual amazing treatment. Let me just say first what OCD is, the type that you struggled with, and then I'd just like to hear a little about, before we go into the treatment, which was it was just amazing. But to hear about your whole life, your background really touches me. But Essentially, OCD is considered one of the most difficult to treat psychiatric disorders, if you want to think of it as a disorder, and there's two parts to it, the obsession and the compulsion. And the obsession is a thought, and it's usually not a very rational thought, but it makes you very anxious. Like in your case, you're afraid of getting contamination on your hands and didn't want to touch doorknobs leading it, or the push the handle to get into the or Stanford Behavioral Sciences building every Tuesday night, and a lot. And then there's, because the fear there is contamination. I'm going to get contaminated, and then there's the compulsive rituals, which are attempts to undo the anxiety, or in which, in your case, was washing your hands over and over again, and being extraordinarily careful about cleanliness and when you shower. This was the same version that Howard Hughes had, and the billionaire who spent the latter years of his life in some hotel room, I think in Las Vegas, some penthouse suite, and people could only slip things to him under the door, and he had to have everything was taped off to try to prevent contamination. It was a very sad episode, and kind of surprising, because he was a handsome, dashing playboy entrepreneur, always inventing things and developing new things, and yet often this disorder strikes people. I wouldn't say always, but often people who are quite bright and quite intelligent, and they get into this thinking pattern that can really be hell. Maybe we should go right into what it was like for you, and then we'll come into your childhood after a little bit.
Okay. Well, just like you said, David, I was very afraid of touching doors, opening doors without having a napkin. So I carried tons of napkins in my purse and in my car, and I was to the point that sometimes I would not allow my daughter to open the door. I would open it for her so that I would use a towel or a napkin to open the door. Elevators, I would always try to use the same towel to get onto the elevator. I'm saying that as I'm picturing myself going into the psychiatry building at Stanford and then proceeding to the elevator. So that was debilitating enough, but what's even worse was at home. I was using paper towels to open the doors of my refrigerator, my microwave, my dishwasher, my washing machine, my dryer. Well, you get the point. It was always this constant not wanting to touch things. And yes, I think I was afraid of germs, but it always seemed yucky to me to touch these things, especially if I saw the doors had lots of fingerprints on them. There's no way. I avoided putting things where I knew there was dirt or thought that it was a yucky place, and then transfer it to another place. I was always dusting things off. If things fell down, when I took them out of the dryer, I would have to throw them back into the dirty laundry to wash them again. So it was a very extreme. You mentioned my shower. It took me about an hour to take a shower because I did all these rituals of cleansing the shower before I got in the shower, then cleaning myself and cleaning the shower after I got done with the shower. It was just very intense. It robbed me a lot of my time. My precious time with my family was spent on cleaning my hands, especially in the winter. My hands would always have these sores because I washed them so much, cuts. And although I thought that infection would go in through my skin that way because I had cuts, it didn't seem to bother me as much as needing to wash the hands. So as you can see, the rituals really take over.
How did they get started?
Well, I don't know anything precisely that got started, but I did. I can go back and point it to the mid-90s. I used to work for Valley Mental Regional Center, and I worked with developmentally disabled families. So I would go into their homes, and I think I was constantly told by my supervisor, who was a nurse, wash your hands after you go see a patient, wash your hands after you see the patient, or before and after. When we got back to the office, there was this ritual about washing our hands. And I even remember there was a contest once at a training where we were given this solution to wash our hands, and then the person that had the least germs, that these solution spotted them on your hands after you wash them. The one that had the least was the one that washed their hands the best. So that kind of showed how well you wash your hands. So I don't want to say that I think that was the onset. It just got progressively worse. But what I can remember is always needing to wash our hands. I mean, it could been prior to that, but that's
It seems like that all of the cleaning and hand washing and the other things you described must have really impacted the relationships you had with your family members.
absolutely, Rhonda. I was constantly telling my husband and my daughter, wash your hands, wash your hands. As I mentioned, I wouldn't let my daughter open public doors. I had to open them for her because I had to protect her with this napkin. With my husband, he kind of brushed me off sometimes, but I would always say, "Oh, go wash your hands before you pick this up or before you help me with the laundry or anything that he had to help me in." I always was pushing him to wash his hands or not to leave certain things in certain place so that they wouldn't get contaminated from whatever I thought dirt was there.
But I was kind of imagining, like, if you needed to go somewhere and you needed to be someplace on time, maybe that would be a struggle because you had to do all these rituals.
Right. And I could never leave the house ready to go anywhere on the spur of the moment. It took me at least 2 hours to get out of the house in the mornings. So I always had to plan for that time. And yes, it is. Interesting enough, once we got on the road or we were out and about, I wasn't as panicky about finding a sink to wash my hands. It just didn't seem as bad. I mean, I still didn't touch things or I didn't sit on the floor for one. Now I can just rub the carpet and lick my hands and I have no problem with that. But that's thanks to Dr. Burns and the wonderful team. But yes, it did have a toll on the family. Absolutely.
How about a personal toll in terms of feelings of shame, anxiety, or self-criticism?
Yes, I think once we did the wonderful, what should I call it, miraculous miracle that Tuesday night, I realized how much shame I was carrying around. I did feel shame when I opened doors. I made sure people didn't see me, or in the bathroom I did rituals so when people weren't there, or getting out of the bathroom and such. But I do know there was I could tell that I had a shame for doing these things, but it really wasn't until I was cured from my OCD that I was carrying so much shame. And the main thing that really the next day that really unfolded for me is how much shame I was carrying around. And you asked how much shame we feel in the daily mood log, and I think I put 100, but now thinking back, I probably had like 1,000. I think that was probably the biggest feeling I had. Just so much shame, and so much shame that I took so much time away from my family, so much shame. The other piece, talking about relationships, my mother's no longer with us, unfortunately. She passed away in December, which was right before this treatment, but she just to worry about me.
That.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
How
you.
old was she?
She was 89, and unfortunately she was the beginning onset of dementia, so she was she had to be cared for every day.
Oh.
And that's sad, but
who was she living with?
she was on her own. My sister stayed with her, but I would take care of her 2 to 3 days out of the week. And my siblings in Stockton, yes, and my siblings and I would take care of her. And the sad part, although towards the end of her life she didn't notice this, but she was always worried about me, noticing me washing my hands so much, or if I came over to her house, the way I tried to open the door with a paper towel, or her refrigerator, and I think it really hurt her a lot. And for me, it was sad that I think I talked a little bit about it during the session that Tuesday, that she didn't get to see me healed, and that kind of made me quite sad, because I know before her dementia, she would look at me and kind of wondered, and but never knew how to bring it up. But I know she was impacted by it.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know what? There's a close person in my family who it does exactly the same thing as what you've just described
Yes.
with, and she feels kind of self-righteous and protective.
Yes.
Did you have any of those thoughts?
Well, I think I didn't when it was happening, but I think when we did, or the positive reframing, that I realized that what I was doing was trying to protect my family. And in that sense, yes, I think I felt like it was my right to protect them, and that's what I was doing. But when I look at what happened with my mother, I think she felt like she had germs and I had to protect myself from her. And I think that's what
So it kind of
made
was putting you away from
her, right,
creating distance between
right, and not being as close to her. And that I now look back and think she probably thought I was rejecting her, or thinking she was not clean enough. But it really, and she was a clean freak, by the way, and I think that had a big impact on me.
Sure.
Yeah, but
That
wherever
sounds
she
kinda
is, I know
hurtful.
she knows I'm healed, and that it wasn't about her.
Yeah.
It's very, very sad. Tell us about that Tuesday night. I know that you had been mentioning really for a year or two, when you were coming to the group and learning and evolving into a fabulous team therapist. We'll talk more about your practice at the end
Yeah.
of this podcast. But you were always saying that that you'd love to come up and maybe do a little intensive, or maybe record a session. We actually did record some of it, didn't we?
The actual
The audio.
the audio, yeah, there is an audio, I believe.
Yeah.
Of the actual session.
Yeah.
I unfortunately I haven't been able to pull it up, but I know it's there somewhere. But
Oh,
I
okay.
haven't really listened to it.
It's
But
not crucial, but
yes.
tell us one. I think we were going to do live work that night in the Tuesday group,
Right,
personal healing.
and I think I wasn't even planning on this. And if I think back, if I would have thought we were doing that night, I might have chickened out. But I think how it happened is you asked for us to raise our hand if we had done our homework for that night in terms of anxiety. And I raised my hand and I said I had not done it. And you asked why. And I said, oh, because I was anxious of being anxious. And then that's when you said, oh, well, let's work on that tonight, and let's do a live session. And I took you up on the offer, although I was very, very anxious about it. I still remember kind of a little feeling physically
What was that
shaken.
right for you, Sarah? How come you didn't say, "Oh no, Dr. Burns, it's okay, I don't want to"? What pushed you forward?
Well, I think it was the idea that I could probably finally find relief, and I knew that putting myself in his hands and in the Tuesday group, I think I guess I had hope that there would be some remedy that evening. And I don't think I gave it much of a thought when he said if I wanted to do it. I didn't even hesitate, because I think if I would have hesitated, I probably would have talked myself out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the treatment for anxiety. Well, it can be incredibly life-changing. It requires a lot of courage. Because the anxiety is so intense, and I've had so many. I've had, as I've mentioned in group, I've had 17 anxiety disorders myself, and so I know how important exposure is and the other treatment methods, but also how terrifying it can be. And a lot of people who struggle with anxiety would just decide to keep the anxiety because they're so afraid of the cure.
Facing it. And I think in addition to that, as Rhonda asked what motivated me, I think not only did I have hope, but I had trust.
Yeah, that was huge. That was so big, so important.
Yeah, I had a big trust, not only in the members and in you, Dr. Burns, but also in the process.
Yeah.
I trusted the process.
Yeah, I'll tell you something interesting because that's a great bond that we have, and it means a lot to me, and it's so important in the therapeutic process. And we have that as well, Rhonda, which makes for good podcasts. But I did an interview for kind of a high profile person just in the last week for a TV show or radio show, something like that. And the host is a lovely woman who I have tremendous admiration for. I've been on her show quite a few times, but she's also a therapist. And before the show started, she started talking about a woman she's trying to treat with OCD, and not exactly the same as yours, but OCD nevertheless. And she described to me how this woman gets angry with her. I don't think she's using the feedback forms.
Right, got it.
And the woman was shouting at her recently during a session, and she told her, now close your eyes and visualize and think about something positive. And it was so, not an empathic response, not even maybe a good move therapeutically, because you've got to have warmth and trust. And if someone's angry with you, that's good, but encourage them to express the anger and show support and disarm, like what we're practicing on the disarming technique podcast just recently, because without that trust, you're going to get nowhere. And I know that personally as well, because, I can remember David Olson was in our church. My dad was a minister. And he was older, so he was cool. And, he had a car he drove around in. We were just, young teenagers, and he would tell stories, and we thought he was awesome. And once he told me when we were out on a picnic in the desert that he wanted to show me this cave on the edge of a cliff. But we would have to climb across this little ledge. It was about 18 inches wide. It was 1,000-foot drop off to get to this cave. And I had a fear of heights, but I trusted David Olson. And so I followed him, crawling along about 15 feet to get to this cave. And I never would have done that without the trust. That I liked him, I trusted him, I knew that he liked me, that he was a benevolent person, that he wouldn't hurt me. And I think that's so important in the treatment of all of psychotherapy, but especially for anxiety disorders.
Right, because you're going to ask people to do something that's so anxiety provoking that they could pass out or think that they might pass out or face their worst fears. And if they don't have trust in the therapist or even affection, then why would they take that chance? Or hope, like Sara said, if they don't have hope.
Yeah, exactly. And psychotherapy is so much more than clever methods to cure people. There's a relationship, and then there's the resistance to melt away, and then you come on with your powerhouse and very extreme methods that Sara will now describe.
Oh, okay. Well, I think I'd rather have Rhonda describe it.
I'm not, Sara. I sadly was not there.
Oh, that's right.
I've seen the video.
You were in there. Well, the main method we use, or that Dr. Byrne led us in, was exposure, big time exposure. But
you remember the story I told first? From
yes,
the Twilight Zone.
Yes, and I think it's best that you describe it because I might leave things out.
Well, you see, to be cured of anxiety, you have to confront the monster that you fear the most, and you're afraid of death. And there was an old Rod Steiger, Twilight Zone was my favorite, and it's this elderly woman, and her apartment building is being torn down, and she's the last one to be evicted, but she refuses to leave her apartment. And the supervisor comes and says, well, why won't you leave? We got to tear the building down, ma'am. The crew's going to be here in an hour. And she says, well, Mr. Death is outside, and when he's waiting for me. when he touches you, you die. And she says, no one else can see him, but I've been able to see him ever since I've been a little girl. And I was on a bus and he touched this man who instantly died. But he disguises himself, so his appearance changes. So, but I know he's outside, and I'm not gonna leave. I'm not gonna leave the building. And then this poor superintendent is so frustrated. He says, "Well, I'm going to come back in a little while, ma'am, and you've got to, you're going to have to leave." And he's just talking to this guy, but behind, she won't even open her door all the way because she's afraid maybe he's Mr. Death. And so then this guy leaves, and all of a sudden she hears this wailing outside of her apartment, and is, "Help! I've been shot." And she opens and she looks, and it's that Robert Redford when he was young. And you know who he is?
Yes.
And he's this like ultra handsome guy, and he's lying there in the snow. And he says, "Please help me. I've been shot. I'm going to die." And she says, "I know who you are. You're trying to trick me. You're Mr. Death. I'm not going to come out." He says, "Please help me." And he's so charming and so sad that she decides to take a chance, and she opens her door and takes his hand and brings him into her apartment, and she locks up the door again and puts him on her bed, and he's just real sweet, and she makes tea for him, and it's this really beautiful relationship that they have. And then the superintendent comes back and starts leaning on the door. He says, "Ma'am, you've got to get out now. We're going to tear this down in 10 minutes. And she says, "Oh, I know who you are. You're Mr. Death. You're trying to get in here." And he leans on it, and the door slams open. The chain breaks, and he falls on the floor. And she accidentally touches him, and she realizes she hasn't died. And she says, "So you're not Mr. Death?" And he says, "No, ma'am, I'm just the superintendent. You've got to leave." And she says, "Well, I can't because of this young man on the bed who's been shot." And he looks and says, "What young man? There's no young man on your bed." And he says, you get out now because we're going to tear it down in 10 minutes. And he leaves. And then she looks and she sees Robert Redford on her bed, and she says, "You tricked me." And he says, look into the mirror. Look at my reflection in the mirror." And she looks at the reflection, and there's no one on her bed.
Ooh, creepy.
And then she knows this is Mr. Death, and she says, "You tricked me, you tricked me." And he says, "Take my hand." And she says, Am I going to die now?" And she takes his hand, and she says, "When is it going to happen?" And he says, Look at the bed. Look at the bed again." And then she sees her own dead body in the bed. She says, "You mean I've already died?" And he says, "Yes, but this is just the beginning." And then they go out hand in hand, into some, wonderful new life. It's just so tearful and beautiful. So then
Beautiful.
when I said that, I said, "Then take my hand now. We're going to go and confront that monster together." And then we went out of the seminar room with about 25 students traipsing after us and tell us what happened.
So we started, after you briefed me about what we were going to do,
So this was
going to the
after
bathroom.
a little bit of testing, and people offered you empathy. Did
Empathy.
that happen?
Well,
and then you did some positive reframe, so they assessed
We
your
Yeah.
we did
motivation and
right. We did
resistance. You did all that stuff, and then David probably said, "Are you ready to get rid of it right now?"
right by
Right?
shaking my hand or taking my hand, and we went out together to the bathroom. We started in the women's bathroom. Luckily, there was no one in there, so everyone.
25 of us rammed in.
Yeah, I think there was more like 40 people, but
Yeah.
we didn't count that day. But there was quite a few therapists, and so we went into the women's restroom, and we went into the handicap stall so that more of us could cram in there. And so Dr. Burns went ahead and said, "Go ahead and touch the toilet," and he proceeded to touch the toilet. And so very reluctantly, but I had to follow the lead, so I did touch the toilet. I still remember how anxious I was. And then everyone was rooting that I did it, and then
And
I
you remember
proceeded.
how you pulled the toilet seat up?
I pulled the toilet seat up, and then rubbed my hands on the bottom of the
On the porcelain?
on the porcelain, and
The porcelain under the porcelain
porcelain.
toilet seat,
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
like
yeah.
really the innards
Inners.
there.
Ew.
And so then, yeah, most people were saying, "Ooh, and aren't you going to wash your hands after we're proceeding out of the bathroom?" And so the whole idea is, no, I can't wash my hands. So then we touched every doorknob that we could possibly find on our way um, down to the first floor, going on the elevator, and then we made it to the first floor, and so here's the door. I guess I didn't seem, I was anxious. I was very anxious.
I asked you your anxiety level. Do you remember what
Yeah,
it
I
was?
think I said like 200.
Yeah.
Definitely more than 100. And it's funny because I think how I had just touched the toilet, but I still was feeling anxious about the front door. And there were so these fingerprints, and so I had to kind of rub my hands on there. And as I'm describing this, I'm seeing myself then, and I was very anxious because I'm starting to feel anxious right now, just creating the story. So that was bad enough, but then we proceeded to go outside, and we found a garbage can right next to the door. Why don't you share that part?
Okay, and so I said, let's now we'll put our hands in. It was empty, but it was all crappy on the edges with goo and stuff, like
Yeah.
an
Lots of
old.
goo.
And it was a
Commercial garbage
big,
can.
a
Yeah,
big
garbage
garbage can, and so I put my hands in there. Said, "No, put your hands in here." And I think you said something like, "No, I'm about to vomit." I said, "Well,
yes.
just put your hands in there and vomit if you have to, but you
Yeah.
must do this." And then tell us what happened.
Yeah, I really was feeling very anxious. My legs were trembling. My heart was beating very hard. I mean, I was just, I couldn't contain myself. I guess I think I was doing this little dance back and forth with just my hands on the can, but I couldn't put them in there. And there were some points where I felt like I was just going to vomit. And I think that would have been more embarrassing than actually touching the can. But I finally did go ahead and put him in there, and then I robbed him, and then people were so happy and rooting for me and Dr. Burns that we just did it. At one point, people were high-fiving me, even though my hands were black from the garbage, all the
And
yucky
you
stuff.
rubbed your
Oh, we
face.
rub our faces with it, and then
And then a lot of the people panicked and
yes,
said, "Well, there were those
I
wipes
was,
there,
yeah, yeah.
like a
So,
dispensary."
yeah,
And people
they
were saying, "Well, tell her to wipe her hands."
hands, and we were, oh, you want to
Clean.
wipe? And we're like, no, that's not the point. And there's also a part where one of the other students had a chewing gum, and they said, well, here, throw my chewing gum into the garbage can. And I said, sure. So at this point, I think my anxiety level is going a little bit down. So I grabbed the gum, but not only did I throw it in the garbage can, before I proceeded to do that, I rubbed it all over my hands and then threw it in the garbage can. So I think just the idea of confronting my fears was very anxiety provoking, but I think that was the healing part.
And then when we got back to the room, it was so touching, and
Yeah.
you said your anxiety level had suddenly dropped to 1
Right.
on a 0 to 100. And then as you talked, you began to cry.
Yes.
Do you
And
remember what you said?
yes, and we did, I think, a little bit more empathy at that
Yeah.
point, and people were very encouraging and supportive. And we we talked a little bit more about how this had affected me my whole life. Well, not my whole life, but at least 20 years of my life. And how debilitating it was. And one of the therapists asked, Helen, one of the leader therapists asked, if this actually had been, because she felt that I went through the process so eagerly, although I was very anxious. She wondered how much it was impacting my life. And then I started talking about what I talked earlier in the podcast about how all the problems that it had created in terms of, you asked Rhonda, relationship wise, time wise, managing, just my whole life. It had really a big impact. And that evening, everything just went poof.
Yes. So what
And I
was
was
life like
excited.
when you went home?
When I went home, I was very excited. I have about a hour and 45-minute drive home. And I was um, very, I was beyond uh, words can explain. I don't know even how to say it, but I was delighted. I really do believe in this death of the ego or death of this monster, because I feel very lighted, very enlightened, enlightenment, like you say, um, and it was wonderful. Unfortunately, when I got home, but in a way, fortunately, it was almost 11 o'clock, and I had stopped and grabbed something to eat. But when I got home, my husband and daughter were asleep, and I really didn't get to see them till the next day in the evening, which I didn't have an opportunity to share with them what had happened. Um, but my husband during dinner time noticed that I was happy and that I wasn't, and out of the blue, he just said, "Oh, seems like you've been cured from your germs." And I had not said a single thing to him. And I kind of chuckled and then proceeded to touch the floor and then lick my hands. And I did that twice. And, uh, and I did this in front of my husband and daughter, and my daughter was beyond belief because, of course, she has only known a mom that has had OCD all her. Um, at this time, she was 17. She had not known anyone else but a mom with that was germ phobic and just was constantly. Oh, she would have never dreamed that I would one day rub the floor and lick my hands, and so that was beautiful to see them see. Me transform just overnight, literally. Um,
And you said that happened in January. So has it come back?
you know, it has not come back, but I noticed the first week, like Dr. Burns will say, you have to keep on it. And what really saved me was envisioning that there was a couple of pictures taken and also the video that you alluded to that play in my head. And so every time I feel something jacky or I start giving myself those negative thoughts of, oh, germs, or it's like I see my hands black and I think, gosh, if I can handle that, I can pretty much handle anything. I mean, no pun intended, but literally I can handle anything. And I had been a couple times, you know, feeling, oh, I can't leave that there because of whatever's on there. And then it's like, oh, forget it. It's all good, you know? And so that first week was a little more effort because I would proceed to grab a napkin to open the refrigerator and then I would say, why am I doing that? I don't. And so then I would just throw the napkin away or something or just toss it on the counter and would proceed to open the refrigerator or the dishwasher or anything without any problem. So definitely it has changed my life. And I just want to share a little story how far I gone. So this summer we had the opportunity to spend some time with my sister and her family, and she has a little 5-year-old, and I don't know the whole story how it all started, but we were at the playground and he's playing in the playground and my sister's telling him, don't dig in the dirt because we have to leave for dinner. And I don't know if there was no way to wash our hands. I can't remember what the story was, and I just said, oh, will you stop, just let him play, we'll be okay. And then we were and she said, made a comment about, oh, but his hands, and I don't want him to get those worm rings. I forget what the word she used.
Ringworm or something.
Thank you. I don't want him to get those. And I said, oh, it's fine. So then I grab his little hands and I start licking his hands. And my sister was just like, oh my gosh. Of course, I had already told her the story. I mean, I had already sent her the video of me, and because I had spent summers with her and she knew my condition very well. As a matter of fact, my brother-in-law, her husband, had noticed when I would go to restaurants, I would not touch the chair. I would actually open the chair with my foot or pull the chair away from the table with my foot. And my brother-in-law, I remember vividly approaching me about it once, and kind of he looked at me I guess, feeling a little sorry for me, but at the same time was compassionate. But so they knew the story, but for me to lick her little 5-year-old hands just so that she wouldn't get upset because he was playing in the dirt on the playground, I just, I don't know what else to tell you in terms of the healing and the transformation. And by doing it, I didn't feel any anxiety about it. It's just like, well, let's get him clean so we could go to dinner or whatever. But
That's fantastic. Our time is short. I'm just so incredibly proud of you. And I want to just emphasize two things before we stop. And maybe we'll do another podcast and talk about your childhood and coming up with your parents from Mexico and moving from city to city to work in the fields and to be harvesting the fruit. You've come from just my heart goes out to you. I'm just so proud of all that you've accomplished. The first question I would have is that a lot of the listeners may have similar problems and are telling themselves that they're hopeless. Hopelessness is the biggest problem in depression and all of the anxiety disorders. And because you feel hopeless, you feel that you are hopeless. And what do you have to say to those people? Because how long did the cure require? How many minutes did it take?
well, the actual cure after we did the testing and the assessment, the agenda setting, um, I don't think it took more than 5 minutes
Yeah,
from leaving the seminar
yeah.
room to downstairs in the NAP. I mean, it was quick, but I think it did require the trust and the hope that
And the courage.
and the courage to face your fears. You really do have to face your fears and have to, like you say, you have to face the monster and figure out it has no teeth or
Yeah,
something
that's
like
right.
this,
That's
right?
right.
But there is hope, and I myself would be more than happy to treat people with anxiety disorders now because I've been on both sides of
One of our
yes.
ideas is physician heal thyself, and everyone in our Tuesday group, we try to encourage the people we're training to use team with your own issues, because then you become more than a technician when you work with your patients. You become a healer. And I would say one other quick thing is that there's another biblical notion. I know you've had a very religious background, but it's ask and you shall receive.
Yes.
And you asked, and that's what made the miracle possible. You received this miracle, and I believe it's possible for anyone struggling with depression or anxiety disorders. Now, you live down in Stockton, and you've started doing team therapy with great results, and using the intensive model where you treat people in one 3 to 4 hour session if
Right.
possible, and you've been getting great results with that. And you're also bilingual. Uh, so we'll put some contact information in the show notes, but can you say now, if people want to get a hold of you for any reason, but including to arrange some treatment, what can you announce? Would you be willing to announce your email so people would know how to contact you?
Well, I don't have a professional email, but definitely if you want to call me, I can
You give us
leave
a
my
phone number
number.
then, sure.
So I wasn't actually prepared for this, but yes, the number is area code 209-476-8867. You're welcome to contact me that way.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you. It's been just a fantastic
I
podcast.
know, Sarah, thank you so much. It's really been awesome to hear your story.
Thank you, Rhonda, and
You're
thank
go-
you, Dr. Burns.
You're going to touch a lot of people.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this episode under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. The theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.